try it again. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Is it working out? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Everyone sound okay? Yeah. But it's working out.
It's working.
Okay.
So,
Okay. 2 minutes.
Oh, it's the free one that they had at the reception. No, okay, so. So don't give me too much credit, I didn't have a choice.
yeah. No, great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Gill. I'm the Salt Lake County District Attorney, and today we are here to share with you the findings from the Salt Lake County DA's office and the use of force by Salt Lake City Police, the officers Nathan Harward and Darren Austill's use of force, which happened at 350 West 300 South at Pioneer Park, Salt Lake City, Utah, on June 10 of 2021. On June 10th of 2021, the use of force resulted in Mr. Yahe, who died from injuries he sustained as the result of this use of force, which under our state statute led to the creating an investigative task force was called to investigate this use of deadly force. The investigative task force was led by West Valley City Police Department protocol team, which comprised of their officers as well as law enforcement officers employed by other agencies other than the Salt Lake City Police Department. And so at that, on June 29th of 2001, those findings were presented to our office. And then at that time, we went through and reviewed all the materials. And today we are here for our findings. The facts that were determined came out of those findings. And as we've stated before, should we have other facts, then our findings would be different subsequently, and our conclusions would be different. And here are the facts from what we reviewed. On June 10th of 2021, shortly after 8:30 a.m., Salt Lake City Police Department dispatch received a 911 call requesting assistance for a woman who had been stabbed and was heavily bleeding at Pioneer Park in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City Police Department and Salt Lake City Fire Department were both dispatched to the park. Salt Lake City Fire Department arrived first and provided emergency medical care to the woman. Salt Lake City Police Department officers Austell and Harvard arrived on the scene and headed towards where the Salt Lake City Fire Department was treating the woman on the north side of the park. Officer Austell and Harvard were immediately approached by construction workers who directed them to a stabbing suspect who they said had been identified by the woman, and the Salt Lake City Fire Department confirmed that it was the suspect. So they are arriving and they're being met by both the construction workers and the fire department, and they're directing them to the subject. The stabbing suspect, who was later identified as Mr. Yahe, was sitting underneath a tree inside the park. As officers Austell and Harvard began walking towards him, Mr. Yahe stood up. As they walked closer, Mr. Harvard saw Mr. Yahe pull out and open a folding knife. Officer Harvard alerted Officer Austell, who was communicating over the radio with dispatch, telling him, quote, he's got the knife in his hand, end quote. As the officers continued walking towards him, Officer Harvard ordered 3 separate commands to Mr. Yahe to put the knife down, while Mr. Yahe remained near the tree, facing the officers and not saying or responding in any other fashion. Mr. Yahe began to walk towards the officers, still holding the knife. The officers stopped and began backing up as Officer Harvard called out to Officer Austell for a taser. So we'll show you a video. What shows is that Officer Harvard's on one side, Officer Austell's on the other. He's kind of fanned out, and he starts to yell commands and tells him for a taser. Mr. Yahe then, quote, locked onto Mr. Officer Austell and began to run directly at him, holding the knife in his hand as he ran. As Mr. Yahe charged toward Officer Austell in full sprint by now, both officers pointed their handguns at him and yelled additional commands. Officer Harvard yelled for him to put the knife down and stop, as Officer Austell also yelled for him to get back or stay back. As Mr. Yahe neared Officer Austell, still sprinting with the knife in his hand, both officers fired their weapons. Mr. Yahe fell forward to the ground within several feet of Officer Austell, who also subsequently fell backward to the ground after firing his weapon and was still holding the knife. Officer Harvard continued commanding him to drop the knife, and Mr. Yahe released his grip on the knife. Medical assistance was immediately provided. As you remember, they were already there, but Mr. Yahe did not survive his injuries and was declared deceased on the scene. A review of Officer Harvard's body camera video recording shows that the time between Mr. Yahe started running at the officers and the first shot that was fired was approximately 4 to 5 seconds. The protocol investigators determined that Mr. Yahe covered over 108 feet in approximately 6 seconds from where he was by the tree until he fell to the ground. At no time did Mr. Yahe follow any of the officers' commands or give any indication that he would put the knife, put down the knife or stop. The other thing that I want to also say is that the protocol officers, we did have the opportunity to interview both officers, and both officers did provide statements. The other thing to also note is that Officer Austell, we have only 2 video. We also learned from that is that while Officer Harvard's video is the one that we will share with you, Officer Austell believed that he had turned on his video camera, but as he was arriving, they listened to an audible beep. He was under the impression it was running, but it did not itself engage, and so we do not have video from that as well. And we also had multiple other witnesses that we interviewed, as we note in our investigation, and we took their statements as well in our overall review. So at this time, what I would like to do is to show you the one video that we do have. We'll show it to you in normal speed, and then at the same time, we will show it to you one more time in a slowed down as well. So Ben, at this time, would you please go ahead and play that video for me? So this is their arrival in the North.
Yes. Did you guys see it? No, but that lady, I just blew up and she was eating, so I got
Okay.
Salt Lake Fire is already there. So there's multiple witnesses who've identified the suspect.
You guys saw, she said that guy did it?
That's Officer Austell to the left, so they'll start to fan. Keep your eyes straight down towards the trees there to the left, center left.
Hey, he's got the knife in his hand there.
Harvard recognizes that he's got the.
Put the knife down. Put it down. Put the knife down. Darren, taser.
You see him running?
Stop it! Put the knife down now! Put it down! Drop the knife! Drop it! Put the knife down! Let it go, man! Come on, I want to help you! We want to help you! Put the knife down!
And then Harvard kicks the knife. And they start to render.
Come on, man! Hey, come on! Come on, man, we want to help! Where you hit? Come on, man, we want to help! Where you hit, buddy? Come on, man! Huh? He's in. I heard him breathing. Hey, come on, man. Where you hit, dude? Tell us where you're at. Come on, I want to help you.
So again, I'm going to play this one more time, but I'll play it this time slowed down before I go down there again. Notice that Harvard is already there. As the officers both arrive, they're both being informed as the suspect is being identified. They're confirmed from multiple different sources. Both officers indicated that they were also aware of the fact that there was several stabbing wounds to this victim that had occurred, although the suspect had not been identified for them while they were being dispatched. Officer Harvard is the first one who actually starts to notice, according to the interview that we had from him, that the suspect not only stands up, but then he actually reaches in and pulls the knife out and flips the knife open. And Harvard is recording on that. And then as he's yelling commands to him, he starts to move towards them. Austell is fanning to his left. Austell is busy on his radio dispatch because he's sending information on dispatch. Harvard shares that he's concerned that he's engaged doing that, so he's trying to alert Austell to that fact as well. Both officers in their interview also indicated to us that certainly Harvard, because he starts to see him take the full sprint, he's concerned about Austell's safety. Austell also starts to hear that. And initially, while Austell is on dispatch, talking to dispatch, he yells. Harvard says that since he sees him pulls the knife out, he unholsters his gun, puts it to the side of his body because he's concerned about it. But he's also yelling to him to get attention from Austell to say, go on taser, because he's trying to get him to stop there. Austell also says that once he starts to run towards him, that he is locked on him and he's focused on Austell. He not only starts to walk, starts to jog, and then is in a full-born sprint. And he indicates that he's concerned. Now he knows that he's already stabbed this woman, and he's also now going to potentially injure him. But both of the officers also expressed the concern, not about their own safety, but also for the people who were behind them, 15 to 20 feet behind them, who were at Salt Lake Fire, as well as the construction workers. So I'm going to ask Ben to play this one more time, but this time slowly. You can see right there, Mr. Yahe, he is starting to move towards them. And at this stage, when we do it, you'll notice that Austell is starting to back up. And at this point, he starts to run. And now he is in a full stride running towards Austell at this point. You can look at it, and that's when Harvard goes on gun. And he gets to about 20 feet, as he says, when he fires that weapon. And you can see the knife is in his hand on full speed at the strike. And you can see Austell falling back because he's starting to go east to try to put some distance between him as he goes full speed. And then you see him get up. The knife is still in his hand at that moment. And he's as they're yelling commands, and he finally releases the knife out of his hands. What we found were that there were 3 shots that were fired by Officer Austell, and 1 shot that was fired by Officer Harvard. The ME's report was that there were 2 hits that were that occurred, and both of the shots would have been individually been fatal. One severed the spine and 2 parts of the aorta. The other one went through 2 lungs and severed the aorta as well. This was the knife that was recovered at the scene. And again, that you can see that shows the knife is still in his hand. Right there, you can see the blade as when we slowed this down as well. The other, and then he finally pulls the hand out. You can see the knife clearly by the grass there as well. In our report, we list that we had multiple other witnesses. We did not go into great detail other than put them in our footnote. In their overall statements were consistent with what the video camera showed, as well as the subsequent interviews that we did with the officers. That the suspect got up and then ran at him at full bore, and the officers' lives were in danger, and they tried to back up and had no choice but to fire their weapon. So based on taking all the evidence that we had from the video, as well as the statements from the officers and all the witnesses, our conclusion was that it was it was not unreasonable for the officers in this situation to use deadly force, that it was reasonable for them to be in fear for their life and the safety of others as well, and therefore the affirmative defensive justification would be available, and therefore we declined to file any charges, and with that we bring this to a conclusion. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Typically, you like to try and contact the victim's family, talk to them.
Yes.
Were you able to find any family from Mr. Yaha, and did you get any more insight on what was going on with him?
That's a great question. We have not been able to locate any family for him, and we've reached out within the refugee community to see if there are individuals who may know him. He had in his possession a ticket to Do you remember, it was, I think it was Nigeria or Sudan, but he had a ticket to fly out of the country. So we are still in the process of trying to locate some familial contact here and working back, but we have not been able to locate any family members. He was scheduled to fly out very shortly of the country.
I know that the stabbing that happened before that is being investigated by Salt Lake City police.
Yes.
Are there any details that you're kind of at liberty to comment about?
Yeah, I can tell you this much. This is what we discovered. The young woman was at the park. She approached Mr. Yahe and asked for a cigarette lighter. She wanted to have a cigarette. And his response was, this is not an effing 7-Eleven. And at that point, she said that he got up, pulled out a knife, and stabbed her in the arm, and then started to stab her multiple times. And she said he was very angry, and she doesn't remember how many times that she was stabbed. But at that point, she ran away from him. And as she ran north from him, as you can see where he was stationed, there's a lot of construction that is going on the north side of Pioneer Park. She was yelling, and workers from the construction site came down to her aid, and 911 was called, and Salt Lake City Fire Department responded very quickly. In fact, Salt Lake City Fire ended up there before the two officers responded there. And they had started to treat her, and she was the victim of multiple stab wounds, including a fairly significant stab wound to her stomach area, abdomen area. And during that period, while dispatch is also calling police to respond, she's communicating and she's identifying the suspect. And that is why multiple people, as Harvard and Austell respond, they're already directing them as they're responding, saying, there's the suspect, there's the suspect. And both of the officers said that they wanted to sort of get to the victim. And as they get there, they're also being told by fire personnel that that's the suspect based on what she had said to them. And one of the officers says that she was already on the gurney. And so they had confirmed the injuries, but they're now being alerted to the violence has occurred. Harvard starts to fan out because they know they have to make contact. And as Harvard is approaching, he says that he sees, Austell does not see this immediately. Harvard sees it. He stands up, reaches in, pulls out the knife, flips it open. That's when he draws his service weapon. And he says, I put it down my side because I'm saying this guy's already ostensibly stabbed somebody. And I've seen him pull out a knife. I'm concerned that he may do that. And he's starting to yell commands, but he's also trying to alert his fellow officer who's kind of fanned off to the left.
So this was over a lighter, and that's the thing that apparently set him off.
Again, that is what we know, and that is all the facts that we have. So I don't have any more great detail about Mr. Yahe, about what he was going through or what his state of mind was at that time. But based on what the victim in the matter did communicate, she basically wanted to smoke a cigarette, approached the person, asked for a lighter. She says that he responded in a very angry way, and the next thing she knows, he's pulling out a knife after he makes that statement, and she gets stabbed in the arm, and she gets stabbed multiple times, but she can't even remember how much, and at that point, she's in fear for her life, and she's running.
Toxicology on
I'm sorry?
toxicology, did you get?
We have not yet gotten a toxicology from the ME on that, but what we did get the medical report, which, as I indicated, the 2 fatal shots, either one of them individually would have been fatal, but two hits out of the 4 shots that were fired. And Officer Harvard says he fires the one shot as he's approaching him, and he stops because as he's going, and you see Austell starts to move east, Officer Austell is starting to go into the line of fire for Officer Harvard. So he stops, and he doesn't want to make sure that he hits the other officer for friendly fire. Okay. Yes.
Just to verify, when was he expected to fly back to Nigeria? Was it
You know, I don't have I know it's in the report. I know that it was within several days of this incident. I think he had I'm trying to remember, it was, yeah, he missed the flight, right? He had a ticket. He was supposed to have flown out 2 days prior to being shot, excuse me. I stand corrected. That he had a ticket with him, but had missed his flight. Any other questions? Thank you.
Do you want me to video again? You're good? Awesome. All right, thank you all for coming. Let me know if you need anything digitally or just text me.